The sirens cut through the calm of our Sunday morning like a buzzsaw. I was in the garage, tightening the bolts on my old Harley, when I heard the crunch of gravel and the unmistakable bark of a suburban tyrant. "Excuse me, you cannot park here," came the shrill voice. I knew that voice better than I knew my own heartbeat. Claudette, HOA board member, 60-something with sprayed-on hair, an obsession with bylaws, and the soul of a DMV line. She had one hobby, making life miserable for everyone on Sycamore Glen. I stepped out and saw her standing, arms crossed like she was guarding Fort Knox, glaring at my daughter's little gray sedan. My daughter, Jenna, had come home from college for the weekend. She parked in front of our own damn house. "You're blocking visibility," Claudette snapped when she saw me approach. "This is a safety hazard. I've already called the sheriff." I blinked. "She's parked legally, Claudette." Claudette's eyes widened like I'd just insulted her casserole. "We have rules, Marcus, rules." Section 4.2.3 of the HOA agreement clearly states, I read the agreement. It says no overnight street parking. It's 10 in the morning. She ignored me, already pulling out her phone. "He's becoming hostile," she muttered loudly enough for me to hear. "Yes, I'd like to file a complaint." "I feel threatened." My wife, Danica, came out onto the porch, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "What's going on?" Claudette turned to her like she'd spotted a cockroach. "Your daughter is parked illegally, your husband is being aggressive, and I'm not going to tolerate this kind of behavior in our neighborhood." Danica stared at her. "You called the cops over a parked car?" "Sheriff's office," Claudette corrected, like that somehow made it better. 20 minutes later, a black and white cruiser rolled to a stop. And I swear to God, the second the deputy stepped out, Claudette's face turned a shade of white I'd never seen before. Because the man who emerged wasn't just any deputy. It was Sheriff Nolan Beckett. The same Nolan who used to coach our daughter's softball team. The same Nolan who had been at our 4th of July barbecue last year, flipping burgers and singing along to Springsteen. The same Nolan who used to date Danica's sister back in high school. "Danica," he called out, arms wide. "Nolan," she laughed, walking down the porch steps and into a giant bear hug. Claudette's mouth hung open like a broken screen door. "You called this in?" Nolan asked, glancing at Claudette. "Yes," she said, recovering fast. "This family is in violation." He held up a hand. "Claudette, it's a legal park job. There's no violation here." "But the HOA doesn't make traffic law," Nolan said flatly. "You wasted our time. Again." I watched her swallow hard. Her hands twitched at her sides like she was deciding whether to argue or retreat. For once, she chose retreat. "This isn't over," she hissed at me as she turned to walk off. I grinned, looking forward to round 2. But what I didn't realize then, what none of us realized, was that round 2 would come a lot sooner than expected. And this time, Claudette wouldn't just be annoying, she'd be criminal. 3 days after Claudette's dramatic sidewalk performance, a letter showed up in our mailbox. It wasn't mailed, it had been hand-delivered. No stamp, no postmark. Just a crumpled envelope with our address scrawled in aggressive cursive and sealed with the HOA's logo sticker, like some medieval decree. Danica set it on the kitchen counter without a word. I opened it while Jenna stirred sugar into her coffee, already packing to head back to campus. The letter was printed in bold, formal font, but it reeked of spite. "Notice of violation. Unauthorized obstruction of community access," it began, followed by a paragraph accusing us of jeopardizing visibility and emergency response access by allowing a non-resident vehicle to obstruct communal frontage. Jenna raised an eyebrow. "Communal frontage. That's just the curb." I read further and nearly laughed. According to the letter, we had been fined $200 and were under review for continued non-compliance with neighborhood safety standards. Danica took the paper from me, scanned it, and dropped it on the counter. "She's escalating. She's bluffing," I said. "None of this is enforceable. She's got no legal ground." Jenna's eyes narrowed. "What does under review mean?" Danica exhaled slowly. "It means Claudette's trying to build a paper trail." She wants to make it look like we're chronic offenders. She's not gonna stop, I said, staring at the envelope. We need to find out what she's really doing behind the curtain. That night, I went up into the attic and dug out a dusty plastic file box I hadn't touched since we bought the house 7 years earlier. Inside were the original HOA disclosures, the bylaws, and the community charter. I spent the next 3 hours cross-referencing every clause Claudette had referenced in her letter. When I got to section 7.4, something caught my eye. The Violation Review Committee, the group supposedly handling our review, was listed as requiring a minimum of 3 board members not currently involved in a dispute to conduct any investigation. The current board only had 4 people. Claudette was one. Her cousin Marvin was another. The third, a guy named Derek, had moved out 2 months ago, meaning the only eligible member left was a woman named Ruth who had broken her hip and hadn't attended a meeting in over a year. There was no committee. There couldn't be. At 8 the next morning, I walked over to Nolan's office at the sheriff's substation on Fairview Road. I didn't go there to file a formal complaint, not yet. I just wanted to get a sense of whether this was a pattern. Nolan was at his desk, sipping from a mug shaped like a boot. He looked up as I walked in. "Marcus," he said, "didn't expect to see you so soon." I handed him the letter. "She's not stopping, Nolan. This landed in my mailbox yesterday." He read through it in silence, then set it down. "I've gotten 5 similar complaints from residents on your street in the last 3 months." I sat down. "All from Claudette," he nodded slowly. "She's been pushing the boundaries, trying to extend HOA authority into areas that fall under county jurisdiction, mostly nuisance reports, but last week she claimed a neighbor's security camera was pointed at her windows. Turned out to be a motion light." I leaned forward. "So she's fabricating?" "She's dancing close to it," he said, "but here's the kicker. One of the deputies told me she's been attempting to fine people for things that aren't even in the bylaws. Illegal landscaping, improper mailbox colors, suspicious gatherings. We're keeping an eye on it." That evening, I walked over to my neighbor Theo's place, retired Air Force mechanic, lived alone, loved his tomato plants. I asked if he'd gotten any letters from the HOA. He rubbed his jaw and nodded. "Got one last month, said my fence was 2 inches too high, been up since 04. No one said a damn thing until now." I asked if he'd be willing to talk to others about it. He didn't hesitate. By the following weekend, I had quietly spoken to 8 other households. 6 had received similar letters. One couple, the Nguyens, had even paid a fine they didn't owe because they thought it was official. That's when I knew Claudette wasn't just being petty anymore. She was running a scam. I pulled out a binder and began gathering everything: copies of the fake violation notices, emails from residents, HOA meeting minutes or the absence of them, since Claudette hadn't posted any since January. I built a timeline. I highlighted contradictions. I created a list of every single fine she had issued in the last 6 months and compared them to actual bylaw violations. Then I found it. One name kept popping up on the payment received lines, a private P.O. box under a company called Glenview Administrative Services. I ran a corporate search. It was registered to Claudette's maiden name. Danica looked over my shoulder at the screen. "She's laundering the fines." "She's billing people under a fake company," I said, "and pocketing it." "We didn't go to the sheriff first. We called the county clerk." A woman named Sylvia answered. Turns out, she'd heard about Glenview Administrative Services once before when another neighborhood tried to file a complaint about fraudulent fines. That case had been dropped due to lack of documentation. I sent her every file we had. 2 days later, Nolan called me himself. "Marcus, you sitting down? Go ahead. We got a warrant for financial records tied to that P.O. box. County prosecutors looking into it. There's a chance this goes to grand jury." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. "She's gonna know it came from you," he added. "I hope she does," I said. That Friday, Claudette tried one last stunt. She came to our door in a blazer 2 sizes too tight, holding a clipboard with a forced smile. "I'm here to conduct a follow-up inspection," she said, peering past me like she expected to find contraband in our flower beds. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "You don't have any legal authority to inspect anything on private property," I said. "And I'd be careful about where you step. You're already under investigation." Her expression cracked. "Excuse me." "You heard me," I said. "You should probably start gathering your paperwork. The county's coming." She turned without another word, her heels clicking down the walkway like they were counting down her last days in power. One by one, the neighbors started speaking up. Theo printed out flyers. The Nuyens knocked on doors. We held a gathering in my garage, not a meeting, just a conversation. People shared stories. Ruth, the injured board member, showed up with a walker and a folder full of complaints she'd never been allowed to read. What started with a parking complaint had become something much bigger. And Claudette had no idea how many people were ready to stand up. The morning Claudette was officially removed from the HOA board, the sky was overcast. Not stormy, just dull and waiting, like even the weather was holding its breath. Danica poured herself a cup of mint tea and glanced at the calendar. "You think she'll show?" "She'll try," I said, flipping through the stack of notarized proxies from our neighbors. "But it won't matter." The emergency vote had been organized legally, with the minimum number of signatures required to trigger a leadership review. Ruth, the only remaining board member with a functioning conscience and hip, had signed the initiating petition herself. With Claudette's cousin Marvin missing in action, likely hoping to distance himself, the board was effectively leaderless. A meeting had been scheduled in the community center that evening, and the turnout was expected to be huge. Before that, though, something else happened. Around 11, two unmarked sedans pulled into Sycamore Glen. They didn't blast sirens or knock on doors. They went straight to Claudette's place. The blinds twitched. A few minutes later, she opened the door in a beige blouse and pearls, like she was heading to a church luncheon. But when she saw who was waiting, her posture changed. Her shoulders tensed. One of the men handed her a folded document. The other kept his eyes trained on her hands. She didn't invite them in. They stepped inside anyway. By the time they left, they carried 2 boxes of documents and a laptop. Danica watched from our window. "Think she knows it's over?" "She's not wired to accept defeat," I said, "but she's about to learn." That evening, the community center was packed. Folding chairs stretched from the back wall to the vending machines, and people still stood along the sides. Ruth opened the meeting with a cane in one hand and a trembling stack of notes in the other. "I never imagined I'd be in this position," she began. "But what's happened over the last 6 months has gone far beyond anything this association was ever meant to be. Tonight we vote. And before that, we listen." She stepped aside. I didn't plan to speak first, but when no one else moved, I stood. "My daughter parked in front of our home 3 weeks ago," I said. "That's how this started." What followed was targeted harassment, fabricated violations, and fines funneled into a shell company Claudette created under a false name. Claudette was seated in the 3rd row, arms folded tightly, her mouth set in a line. She didn't interrupt. "Not yet." I held up a folder. "These are copies of financial records obtained through a warrant issued by the county. They show over $12,000 collected from residents here. Not 1 cent has gone into the HOA's official account. It went into Glenview Administrative Services. An entity Claudette owns." Gasps rippled through the room. A few people glanced at one another, eyebrows raised in disbelief. "She told us we were being fined for mailbox colors, for fence heights, for parking legally. She told us we were under review, but there is no review committee. There is no legal authority behind those letters, and when we started asking questions, she doubled down. She faked paperwork and threatened legal action she had no ability to pursue." Theo stood next. He didn't need a microphone. "She told me my garden was a biohazard. Said I was attracting rodents. I've lived here since 2004, never had a problem, until she wanted to make an example out of someone." The Nuyens spoke. Then a woman named Carla, who had been too nervous to speak until her husband gave her a nod. She told me my wreath was offensive, Carla said, voice barely above a whisper. It was just a pride flag. She said it violated community decorum. Claudette finally stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't plead. I acted in the best interest of this neighborhood, she said. Sometimes leadership means making tough decisions. I was trying to protect property values. I was trying to create order. You created a slush fund, someone called out. You created fear, another added. She turned toward Ruth. You're barely capable of walking. And you think you can run this board? Ruth didn't flinch. I think I can't do worse. The vote was unanimous. Not a single hand rose in Claudette's favor. As people filtered out, I stayed behind, collecting leftover papers. Nolan arrived halfway through cleanup, out of uniform but very much on duty. She's pressing charges, he said, nodding toward the parking lot. Claims slander and defamation. I raised an eyebrow. County DA's not interested, he added, but they are interested in her use of HOA funds. They're opening a formal case. She's looking at wire fraud, misappropriation, and possibly mail fraud if she used the postal service for those fake fines. Danica joined us near the door. What happens next? She'll be questioned. Might try to cut a deal if she gives up Marvin. He signed off on a few of those payments, could get ugly. She'll deny everything, I said. She already tried, Nolan replied. But we've got the payment records. And now we've got statements from 20 residents. Paper trails don't lie. By the following week, Claudette's house went dark. Blinds drawn, no car in the driveway. Word spread she'd hired a lawyer from out of town. Marvin was nowhere to be found. Some said he had left the state. The newly formed interim board led by Ruth, with Theo and Carla as new members, called for a full audit. It found the HOA had been overcharging dues by a small percentage each month. The discrepancy was subtle but consistent enough to suggest intent. They refunded every household. They also passed a rule. No board member could serve more than 2 consecutive terms, and all meetings had to be recorded and posted online within 48 hours. A few weeks later, I was walking past the old mailboxes when a man in a faded flannel shirt waved me over. I didn't recognize him at first. He lived on the far end of the neighborhood near the cul-de-sac. Wanted to say thanks, he said. Didn't think anyone would ever take her on. I didn't do it alone, I said. No, he agreed, but you lit the match. The neighborhood changed after that. Not overnight, but gradually. People talked more. Kids played in front yards again. Wreaths and flags appeared on porches without fear of notices. The HOA meetings became potlucks. No one brought up mailbox colors. Jenna came home for another weekend visit that fall. She parked in the same spot as before. This time, the only thing she got was a wave from Ruth as she walked by with her cane and a basket of muffins. Looks like peace broke out, Jenna said. For now, I replied. But if another Claudette ever shows up, we know what to do. Danica joined us on the porch, a book in one hand, sunglasses in the other. I still can't believe she tried to run a racket with a fake company name, she said. She underestimated everyone, I said. Thought she could bully her way through. Jenna leaned back in her chair. People like that always think they're smarter than everyone else until the receipts show up. And they had. Sealed in boxes, backed by signatures, and filed in a county office with a bright red tag marked Active Investigation. Claudette might have thought she owned the neighborhood, but in the end, she'd only rented the illusion. The first real snow of the season came early that year, coating Sycamore Glen in a soft hush that made even the ugliest yard ornaments look charming. Normally, the neighborhood would have lit up with wreaths and inflatable reindeer by now. But with Claudette's scandal still fresh, people were cautious, waiting to see if the new board could actually hold the line. Danica and I were stringing lights along the porch when Theo walked up the drive with a manila folder under one arm. "You'll want to see this," he said, offering it over. Ruth asked me to drop it off. Inside were the results of the HOA audit. Not just the refund calculations and misallocated dues that had already been handled, but a forensic summary from a volunteer CPA in the neighborhood who'd analyzed the bank transfers tied to Glenview Administrative Services. Danica skimmed down the first page, her jaw tightened. She didn't just pocket the fines, Theo nodded. She pulled in money from municipal grants. I looked up. What grants? There was a community beautification fund set up through the county 3 years ago, he said. Designed to help neighborhoods install benches, maintain sidewalks. Claudette applied for it under our HOA name, got approved for $9,000. Danica looked up from the paper. We never got a single thing. Theo pointed to a line item. It was deposited directly into Glenview's account. She used a copy of the HOA's letterhead, forged Marvin's signature, and submitted fake invoices for services that were never performed. This wasn't just theft from us. It was public fraud. I contacted Nalan. Not through the station. This time I still had his personal number from when we'd helped after his dog went missing 2 years ago. When I told him what we'd found, he was quiet for a moment. I'll pass this to the prosecutor's office, he said. They'll want to talk to the grant administrator too. If she used forged documents to access public funds. He didn't need to finish. By the following week, an investigator from the county's Financial Crimes Division came knocking at our door. A tall woman named Audrey with a badge clipped to her belt and a tired sort of politeness in her voice. I've been assigned to follow up on the Glenview matter, she said. Do you have copies of the original documents she submitted for the grant? I handed over the folder. She paged through it quickly, then paused at one sheet. This invoice says she hired an independent contractor to install solar lighting on the walking trail, Audrey said. There is no lighting on the trail, Danica said. Exactly, Audrey nodded. And the contractor listed on here died in 2016. Audrey interviewed a dozen residents over the next several days. A few of them had received HOA letters claiming the grant funds were used for administrative expenses related to property value enhancement. No one knew what that meant. And when the county's records division requested expense reports from Glenview, the response was silence. Then, 2 days before Christmas, Claudette's lawyer made a mistake. He submitted a motion to dismiss a civil complaint the county had filed, claiming Claudette had acted within the discretionary scope of her volunteer governance role. Attached to the motion was a signed affidavit from Marvin, stating he approved all financial decisions made by Claudette during her tenure. The problem? Marvin was under investigation himself, and the affidavit was dated 3 weeks after he'd supposedly left the state. That opened the door for a deeper investigation. And when Marvin was finally tracked down living with a cousin in Arizona, he flipped. Fast. He admitted that Claudette had offered him a monthly stipend under the table to sign HOA checks without reading them. He provided screenshots, emails, and even a voicemail where Claudette explained how to respond if anyone from the county calls. The grand jury indictment came in January. 7 felony charges: wire fraud, forgery, embezzlement of public funds, tampering with official HOA records, obstruction. 2 counts of criminal impersonation. She was arrested at a hotel near the state line trying to check in under her maiden name again. No one came to post her bail. The trial wasn't long. The evidence was airtight. When the recordings were played in court, even the defense attorney looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Claudette tried to claim she had been misled by others, but Marvin's testimony shredded that idea before it got off the ground. In the end, she accepted a plea deal. 5 years in state prison with eligibility for parole after 3. She was also ordered to pay restitution every dollar she stole with interest. The restitution fund was distributed back to the community. Every resident received a check, along with a formal letter of apology from the county for not investigating sooner. The new board, now with a full 5-member roster, used the remaining funds to finally install the solar lighting Claudette had lied about. And this time, it was done right. Danica and I walked the trail a few weeks after the lights went up. It was early evening, the air sharp with winter, and the lights cast a warm glow over the path. I never thought I'd see this place feel normal again, she said. It's better than normal, I said. It's real. Jenna visited during spring break. She parked in the same spot she always had. Ruth waved to her from her porch and Carla walked over with a plate of lemon bars. Everyone keeps asking how she's doing in school, Danica told her while they sat on the porch. Jenna laughed. It's weird, I feel like a local celebrity. You kind of are, I said. You kicked off the fall of a neighborhood dictator. She leaned back in her chair. All I did was park a car. Sometimes that's all it takes, Danica said. One person doing the right thing. Even if it's small. By the time summer rolled around, Sycamore Glen looked different, not because the houses changed, but because the people had. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years were organizing block parties. Kids chalked drawings on the sidewalks without being told it violated aesthetic harmony. The HOA meetings were open, transparent, and shockingly kind of fun. No one talked about Claudette much anymore. Her name became shorthand for what not to do. A cautionary tale whispered when someone asked if they could run for the board. Just don't go full Claudette. One Saturday, I found Theo fixing a busted latch on the community bulletin board. He looked up and handed me a flyer. New rule proposals, he said. We're voting on them next week. I scanned the list. One stood out. No board member shall have access to HOA funds without dual authorization from two unrelated members. About time, I said. He grinned. That's what Ruth said too. We replaced the bolts, stepped back, and admired the freshly posted flyers fluttering in the breeze. Feels good, doesn't it? He said. Feels earned, I replied, and it was, not because we won some neighborhood battle, but because we exposed what power looks like when it hides behind fake authority, and proved that even the most ordinary people can tear it down, one truth at a time.